Hello, pals. Welcome to Philadelphia Wizard World. I'm Phil Casey with the Comics Pals. Joining me today is one of my favorite artists in the industry today, Mr. Ben Caldwell. Mr. Ben, how are you doing?
Hi, it's great to be here.
My hand is hovering here.
I knew that.
That's not the first time that's happened to me. How's your Wizard World experience been so far?
It's been pretty great. I've had a chance to do a lot of commissions, and I always get some interesting requests, so that's a lot of fun for me.
So you're kind of a jack of all trades artist in this industry. You've done inking and coloring and pencils and lettering and everything. Writing. Very eclectic. What is your personal favorite to do, or do you find it challenging to kind of be a jack of all trades person in this industry?
Well, I like that. I get bored very easily, so I always like trying new things, and whether it's wearing a different hat in terms of the duties I have for a project, or whether it's different sorts of projects, create your own versus giant corporate project, or I do, game and toy and animation stuff too. So I kind of like the fact that every day it's a little fun surprise what I'll be doing.
So when you are inking or doing pencils, what's your collaborative process like with an author? Do you like having very descript scripts to work with, or do you like it kind of broad and to be able to fill in the blanks yourself?
It really depends on the story. I usually like it to be pretty basic because I'll fill in that sort of thing myself. A lot of times I found that in the script itself, even very simple scripts without a lot of description, I've been lucky that the scripts that I've worked with, the writers I've worked with, have been pretty great. And I've found it very easy usually to, in reading the script, no matter how basic it is, to get an idea of what the author's looking for in terms of what the environment's supposed to feel like, what the relationship between certain characters are, and then I can work out the details of how I'm going to visualize that. But I feel that so far, I actually really have been lucky that I feel really clear on what the author wants from what they have, and it's usually been pretty simple.
Thus far in your career, what book do you feel like has allowed you to flaunt the most creativity for yourself?
It'd be hard to say. I'd say I have an unusual career in that my style doesn't always fit into sort of the mainstream market. So I haven't always been as hired as often as some other creators. But when I am, I feel like the editors and art directors involved either trust me enough or they're desperate enough at that point that they'll let me pretty much do what I want. I do have to say one of the ones where I found myself really going the most off the reservation in terms of format and structure and so on was Wednesday Comics when I did Wonder Woman. That was with Mark Chiarello, who's an amazing art director. And when he tells you to go crazy, you go crazy. On top of that, the format itself was 12 pages, and each page was, 100 feet by 230 miles. So it was an unusual format to work in. And also, honestly, at that point, that was around 2008, 2009, I hadn't had much luck getting into regular comic work, and I was pretty sure I never was going to. So I felt a certain carelessness, in terms of just doing whatever the hell I felt like doing. And of course, Mark was more than encouraging, which really helped.
Is American superhero comic book something that you had an interest in growing up?
Oh, always. I loved them. I always wanted to draw them. I'll be honest with you, when I first tried getting in the industry, I didn't really think my style was all that weird or idiosyncratic or that I would have that much trouble finding an audience. I think I underestimated the technical elements of the market and how there are different sub-markets and how you get to the right audience. And of course, it's funny because that's something that the industry itself's been going through with the book market and young adult and so on. And in a way, I've kind of lucked out because I like doing a lot of things, but one of the things I lean towards is more, fun, younger audience stories, especially ones that don't really play off of a deep pre-existing knowledge of characters and so on. And that's not entirely in touch with the mainstream market model that has been around for decades, but it's become more and more of an approach that companies are more comfortable with. Obviously, you've had a lot of great creators and a lot of great publishers doing books that are more in line with sort of things I like doing. So I've found that over the last few years, people have come to me for projects, which is a nice change.
So you gravitate toward lesser known IPs, I guess, like Prez or A-Force. Is that how you would describe your wheelhouse? Do you have any interest in doing more larger books like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man?
I don't know that I would necessarily have a preference. I mean, with Wednesday Comics, I was told I could pick any character I wanted, and I went with Wonder Woman. Um, I think it's more that, well, some of it is these are certain properties, or Suicide Split, Planet Squad project, where they're just weird properties, and so they want someone who they feel is comfortable with that, or they just have a lower bar and they'll take whoever and happen to be around. I think another advantage I have is I'm pretty self-sufficient in that I can build whole worlds off of a little script. I kind of do it anyway, whether they want me to or not. So, I feel that editors have a certain comfort level with just turning things over to me, knowing that I'll do everything on my end to build the relationships of the characters, build the worlds. I also feel that I sort of accidentally hit this sweet spot where I draw a lot of female characters, and they always look attractive. I mean, all my characters look attractive. But I guess, again, I draw them to look attractive but be appropriate for a broader audience than you might find sometimes. And so that's why I found myself being hired, I think, a lot of times for things like A-Force, Prez, Wonder Woman with the female characters, but their main selling point isn't their sexuality or their sexiness, it's them as characters. So that's something I hadn't planned ahead of time, but I seem to have fallen into that, and I'm more than happy with it.
When I think of a book like Prez that takes place in the not so distant future, within the next 10 years, there's a lot of creativity to world build and do different ideas, like the idea of having CEOs with like emoji faces, things like that, or have drones feed tacos to the poor. How much input did you have on that? Because that was a very creative book, full of opportunity.
Right. I'll be honest with you. Out of all the projects I've worked on, that would probably be the one where I'd have the most difficulty separating Mark from myself. I could go back and look, of course, at what's in the script and so on, but I'd say he did came up with a lot of those ideas himself. The dude's insane and disturbingly prescient. Half the stuff he'd write, we'd say, oh, that's funny when we get the script, and then before the pencils were done, it would show up on the news as an actual event. But a lot of those things, if you look at my work before and after Prez, you'll see I love creating tons of fictional corporations. Billboards litter all of my worlds. I have sort of a satirical, over-commercialized approach with the stuff I do anyway. So a lot of those things I did add, and I'm very proud of. But a lot of those things, I think with those heads, for example, the corporate icons, I think he originally was going to have them wearing masks. And I think for me, I thought it'd be easier, because I'm just also lazy, to create a logo for each one, and then just have as a glowing surface that would obscure the face. That way you could copy and paste them over and over instead of redrawing all of these masks. So in that particular case, I think I took it a little further than where he was. But a lot of those things he came up with in the beginning. I think like the taco drone or Who Wants to Be a Super Billion. I don't remember. But he came up with a lot of those things, and I just ran with it. And then some of them, there were things like the news crawls at the bottom of the stories. I came up with all those like fictional news crawls, which is why there are a million references to all this whole Aquaman movies and things like that. But and of course we had some fights with legal here and there with some of the logos we used and how close they were to other things. But that was definitely, I mean, most of them are collaborative to a certain extent. That was definitely one of the most collaborative processes for world building.
I imagine Farmaduke was very upset by that.
I think that they've worked actually Farmaduke into several real canon DC stories since then. Yes, because Marie J. Evans, the editor, she's got fingers in everything. So yeah, I think it's been showing up.
You described your style being appealing to younger readers, and when I think of a book like A-Force or Prez, you can definitely see that. It's like kind of on the pulse of younger generation. What is it about your style you think draws younger audiences like that?
Well, I mean, I have to say I have a bunch of different styles depending on the stories, but I'm a pretty sad person normally, boo-hoo. So when I'm working on stories, I try to focus on stories that'll make me smile a little bit. And I also, I guess in an age when there's so much of an interest in nostalgia and keeping comics the way they are and the way they're supposed to be and pure and this and that, I'd say that I'm driven by a certain nostalgia myself, but I think it's a little different, where a lot of the comics I grew up with, they were not for kids specifically, they were not intended to be silly, but they were books that, because of the nature, The art style was very accessible, probably more for the convenience of printing than anything. But there was a certain clarity to the visuals, and also with the writing, there was a real attention given to making it so that anyone could get into the story, not just in terms of intellectually keeping up with this and that, but also emotionally making sure to build each issue, build a connection between the reader and the characters. Whereas nowadays, I feel that because for mainstream comics, because there's a built-in audience, they can take a sort of visual and literary shorthand where they know the audience is already invested in certain characters and ideas, so they can skip some of that material and know that they're still going to land with their audience. But I still kind of take that old approach where, every page, every scene, every issue, I'm trying to build that connection. So actually, with something like Infinity Inc., we did a two-shot for that a year or 2 years ago, for the Convergence series. And Jerry Ordway wrote it, and a lot of it felt kind of like a CW teen show. So I did everything I could visually and with, with the designs, but also with the way the characters acted and the blocking and so on to really build up those emotional relationships. Because I'll be honest, I had never read Infinity Inc. as a kid, and I knew there certainly would be fans, but I knew there were a lot of people who had never even heard of them or who were kind of vaguely aware of them. And so I wanted to do everything on my end to carry forward Jerry's approach of, making people feel something for these characters and get a relationship built with these characters, even though it was just for an issue or two.
Yeah, I think the nurturing and caring really shows with your work, and that's why I'm such a big fan. Is there anything you'd like to plug at this time?
Well, I do have to say that right now I am working on a graphic novel with Frank Miller. It is Carrie Kelly from Dark Knight Returns and her 13-year-old badass ninjery. It's really exciting. Frank's hilarious to work on with this. I know a lot of people, including possibly some people at DC, might have raised their eyebrows when they heard that Frank, goddamn Batman wanted to write a book about a 13-year-old superhero for 13-year-old girls. But, he likes, we've talked about this quite a bit, he likes to approach each book as if it's his own project. He loves Nancy Drew. She was a big part of creating Carrie Kelly. He loves Carrie Kelly. She's kind of like Batman 2.0. So we've had a lot of fun going over how to make this character someone, and of course there'll be fans of the original and fans of Frank Miller who will want to check it out, but it's also something that any general audience member, any younger reader will be able to pick up and really get into. And like me, and it's kind of surprising, but like me, Frank's not all that hung up on things like continuity or canon. We had some conversations about how that was going to work in the beginning, and his bottom line is, I want Carrie Kelly to kick a lot of ass and, to have fun in the process. So, the whole process has been amazing, and hopefully that'll be done sometime in early 2018, and I'm sure DC will have all sorts of exciting announcements about it coming up in the future.
Oh, that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to that. What's it been like working with Frank?
It's been a little surreal, obviously. I grew up on his comics, and especially The Dark Knight was a huge influence on me. I know a lot of people who have seen my work probably wouldn't expect that because my stuff kind of comes off as goofy and, has talking bunnies and musical numbers. But having said that, I'm always amazed at how people focus on the grittiness of the Dark Knight. That was there, but it was an intensely cartooned book. The city has a character of its own. It looks like it. Everything has a psychological reality in the stylization that you don't always see in more literal and more realistic comics. Also that's another one where it's collaboratively interesting because obviously a lot of it's Frank, a lot of it's me, but even when it is me, it's hard to say how much that is me and how much that is me channeling, some deeply viscerally held ideas that I picked up from the original Dark Knight. But it's been amazing. He's been fun. His studio is an artist delight to visit, and we've just had a lot of fun working on it. And
where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's either Ben Caldwell or Ben Caldwell Art. I'm not that creative with my naming. I have a website somewhere. I don't remember what the name is. Oh, bencaldwell.com. It may or may not be functioning. I'll let that be a fun surprise for you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben. It's been a pleasure talking with you. All right, this has been Ben Caldwell here with me, Phil Casey here with the Comics Pals here at Philadelphia Wizard World. Make sure you follow us on all social media at the Comics Pals and like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube page. Until next time, take care. Woo! Dance.